Welcome, everybody, to the American Space Museum. I'm Mark Marquette, and you're here to stay curious today with Launch Director Mr. Jim Harrington. Hello, Jim. How are
Hi,
you, sir?
Mark. Good to see you.
Well, thank you for participating in our Stay Curious here. We have Mr. Harrington, who launched 22 shuttles in 1995 to 97 here on a very historic day. It's April 12th. And 41 years ago today, Space Transportation System 1 was launched with John Young and Bob Crippen. And wow, you were there, Mr. Harrington. You weren't actually here at Cape Kennedy,
That's true.
but you're going to tell us a little bit about your involvement with that. 41 years ago, I'll bet you don't think that kind of time's passed until you look in the mirror every morning.
That's you're exactly right there. Uh, yeah, I was involved with STS-1, but not here, as you say, physically at Florida. I was 3,000 miles away out at Edwards, which was the primary landing site for that mission. In fact, the first six missions were all destined to land out at Edwards until the program got all of their objectives out of the way, and then we would start landing here at Kennedy. Assuming weather would allow us to do that.
You were vehicle manager for STS-1,
Yes,
correct?
that's
And
true.
that sounds like a pretty big title. So, your launch director was George Page, a legend
Right.
in the from the Gemini Apollo era. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. But before we get wound up into that, I wanted to thank our sponsor, Hyatt Place uh, Hotel on Route 1. Hyatt Place sponsors Stay Curious from inside our American Space Museum here in downtown Titusville. And they are going to be our location for our golden anniversary of the dawn of the Space Shuttle era this Saturday, April 16th, from 9 to 5 free admission. And Mr. Jim Harrington is going to be there as one of three launch directors with Mr. Bob Seek and, of course, Mike Leinbach. And to talk in a little panel discussion at the end of the afternoon about the whole program and what it means to you guys. And the three of you launched 111 out of the 135 shuttles there, Jim. And I know you know Bob Seek well and Mike Harrington.
Mike Linebacker.
Mike Lineback. Yeah, you're Mike Harrington. Mike Lineback, thank you. Uh, that's some pretty elite NASA people there, I think. You
Well,
three.
I don't know about elite, but I think we all had a lot of fun doing our jobs. It
You
was
did, and a lot of memories and a lot of fun, interspersed with, of course, two tragedies that we at the American Space Museum dwell on the accomplishments of our wonderful heroes, and not so much on the details of those tragedies. But you've had an illustrious career. Mr. Jim Harrington is a man that it's kind of hard to find anything about on the internet. All right. When I mentioned that to you, you said good. Okay.
that's
And
true.
there's hardly any pictures of you and NASA stuff and so forth, just to try to find a little color for our show here. But we're so pleased to have you here. Our ladies and gentlemen watching us on Stay Curious, Jim, are all over the country. They're watching on YouTube, of course, Facebook Live, Spotify, and Twitch. And we've got Robert Law is watching in Dundee, Scotland, enjoying his cocktail. We've got Ophelia watches every day from Normandy, France. We've got a gentleman in Australia and just Egypt. It's amazing the outreach of all this because they love
Yeah.
the shuttle and they've come to love our nonprofit here, the American Space Museum. So, wanted Jim to tell us a little bit about where you grew up. Show us your hat there. Yep, the U. He's a fan of the U. Okay, in there, got to show that off. So tell us a little bit about your upbringing and how you got into this world of launching rockets.
I was born and raised in Greensboro, North Carolina. Uh, Grew up there, went through high school, and my father got an opportunity to open up a business down in South Miami. So after I got out of high school, we moved to South Miami. and hence the reason that I went to University of Miami Engineering School. And what turned me on to coming up to the Cape and start working on rockets was about the time that I was getting out of engineering school in '57. The missile industry had started, and I got intrigued by that, and so I started interviewing different companies to get into it. And one of my interviews happened to be with General Dynamics, who that company was charged with developing the Atlas weapon system, which was an ICBM. And so I came up here, drove up here one day after I got out of college, drove out to the Cape, and I thought that was the most desolate place I'd ever been to in my life. I mean, there was absolutely nothing there until you got through the gate, and then you saw all these gantries out on the beach side. And fortunately, I got hired and started working on Complex 14, which turned out to be down the road, turned out to be the Mercury launch site.
Mm-hmm. This is 1960. You started out there, that time frame?
I started in '57.
57. All right. So that was the NACA,
Yeah,
the National Advisory Committee of Aeronautics,
right.
NACA. Then
Yep.
58, they become NASA.
Right. In fact, I throughout my career with General Dynamics until the Mercury launch team was selected, and of which I was fortunate enough to be chosen to be on that team. I went from complex to complex all the way down from 14 to 11 to 12, and worked on different missions. On complex of 11, I remember in December of 1958, we launched a special vehicle that is the first time anything that large had gone into orbit. And we put the entire Atlas into orbit. And that was just prior to Christmas, and that's when Eisenhower made a speech from space, if you would, obviously recorded, talking about Christmas and wishing everybody a Merry Christmas and
Yes, that was called SCORE.
that's right.
And we have I took you in our Cape Canaveral gallery, and we have a little plaque there that has all the people that launched that. You were part of that?
I was.
I'll bet your name's on that in there.
Yeah,
I have to
well,
look at that when we leave
I
here.
hope so.
Because Murphy Wardman, our lead electrical engineer out there, Pad 36, you know Murphy, I believe.
Yeah.
Murphy's 90 years old and usually here on Thursdays. He said that it was a top secret thing about the Eisenhower tape recorder being in there.
It was.
And that they'd actually clipped the wires on some of the telemetry so that they didn't know it was going to orbit. And you're right. The whole Atlas rocket went in orbit.
Yeah, what happened was, I got the day of final count. My boss, Kurt Johnston, who was a test conductor on that vehicle, he took me out of the blockhouse. We walked outside down to the road going down to the pad, and he said, "And what I'm going to tell you is classified, and you can't say anything about it." He said, one of your packages, because I was in the RF systems at that time, and part of my job was to do range safety and do some of the tracking systems. He said, one of your systems has been removed and will not work. He said, your job during the countdown is to fake it. I said, okay. And that was all he told me. He didn't tell me what was going to happen or anything like that. So when
The recording of Eisenhower, nobody knew that was
that's
on
right.
there. Yeah.
That package had been put in place over the system that had been removed, one of my systems,
Hmm.
and so it came in that time into count when I would turn this particular system on. I threw the button, which did power up the recorder.
Mm-hmm.
That part worked, although I didn't know what it was doing. And of course the range controller came back over the air and said, "We don't see it." And I said, "Well, it's out there somewhere. Keep looking." And so we launched, and then of course, history now, we know what happened.
Very historic, and that is so fascinating, Mr. Jim Harrington, there with this piece of history where we launched this Atlas rocket in 1958, right?
Yep.
With a right around Christmas, and President Eisenhower had a recording on there, and the recording from space said something like, "I'm talking to you from outer space, but we come in peace,"
Yeah.
and for the benefit of man type of thing on there. And we've got a little plaque of that in our Cape Canaveral gallery. And when we're done with our show, I'm going to get a picture of you with that plaque because I'm sure you're on there though. But that is a real important piece of history. That yeah, you're like the third person to tell me about some of the secrets that you didn't know what was on it, but you were told to do this and kind of act like everything was okay because
Yeah.
they didn't have the telemetry all the way down to the Canary Islands and everything like they were supposed to, and those people were popping off like, "We don't see this, we don't see
Yeah,
that."
they kept saying no IP, which meant impact prediction.
Oh, no impact predictions.
Yeah,
So they knew it wasn't coming down, they knew it
Yeah.
was coming up. That's interesting. That's as interesting as STS-1 to me here, talking to Mr. Jim Harrington here on Stay Curious. We're glad that you all are joining us today. Um, that really got your feet wet on Missile Row, because this Missile Row was all about protecting our country in the event of a nuclear attack from Russia. And I'm a little boy in those days, okay, but I distinctly remember going to school and having drills, fallout drills and
Yeah.
stuff like that. It was a real threat, wasn't it, Mr. Harrington?
Sure was.
And
Yeah, that the Atlas was the first ICBM that the country had.
mm-hmm,
I mean, missile wise, they had other weapon system that were like the Snark, which was a winged,
mm-hmm.
unmanned aircraft, so to speak.
Matador. I like the Beaumark
Yeah,
is
well,
another one. They were all trying to find ways to go 2,000 miles across the ocean,
yeah.
and
But the Atlas was the first one that was good for 5,000 miles.
and then eventually launched 4 American astronauts in the Mercury program.
Right.
And how cool is it that 40 years later, 50 years later, an Atlas V is man-rated for the Boeing Starliner?
Yeah.
The legacy continues, huh?
Yep. The old, as we used to call it, the old tin balloon still works.
The old tin balloon, because it has to have pressure on it to keep it rigid, and also has the boat tail on the bottom.
That's
the,
right.
The two rockets on the side actually came off at
That's true.
about 15 miles or something like that. Was their
Yeah.
mission.
Yeah, the first series of the Atlas, the A series, it just had the boosters.
Uh-huh.
And then when we got into the B, C, and D series, which were, later versions of it, we had what we call a sustainer engine, which stayed with the vehicle after the boosters dropped off.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. It's got that, like I said, they gave it the boat tail nickname because it looked like the boat on the bottom coming there. Well, you were a contractor for General Dynamics and not working for NASA, but that all changed quite shortly after 7 or 8 years
Yeah.
there, thanks to a man named George Page.
Right.
Tell us about that, Mr. Harrington.
George was his job at the complex during the Mercury program was assistant test director. There was 3 managers on the complex. There was a test director and 2 assistants, and George was on what we call the vehicle side. You know, it was, the engineers were split in two. There was
Mm-hmm.
the vehicle side, and then there was what we call the complex side. And George was the assistant test director for the vehicle side, and he was a wonderful supervisor, and he actually became my mentor for, you know, what I learned before I went into management.
Mm-hmm. Well, he's a legend up there with Rocco Petrone and Tom
Yeah,
O'Malley as real leaders that had to be forceful at times. It was a different era there. Every launch was a virtual unknown of something, right?
yeah,
So there was no funny business, and those three guys, Page, Rocco Petrone, and T.J. O'Malley, were a lot of credit given to their leadership, isn't
right,
there?
yeah,
And they just named your launch control. We're going to see some pictures of the launch control where Jim worked out of. Renamed it the Rocco Petrone Launch
yeah.
Control.
Rocco was he was launch director during the Apollo program.
Yeah, and over the whole Kennedy Space Center
Yeah,
pads and so forth in
yeah,
there. Yes, our hard hat of Rocco's is in the tribute they have out there at the launch control in the case out there. So we're proud of that's on loan. Well, we're talking with Mr. James Harrington here. He was involved with shuttle operations and a launch director. And we have behind us here on our green screen is the morning of April 12th, 1981, when at 7 a.m. we had this scene all over, replayed on television all over America. The signature white tank of the external tank used on the first two shuttles lifting off, and a bird cooperated there to make that a gorgeous shot there. But you, like you said, you weren't in launch control. You were out at Edwards Air Force Base on the first six, you said, being involved in the landing out there. And tell us why they wanted to land out there at Edwards instead of trying to do it on the 3-mile runway at Kennedy.
Well, the program had decided that for the first landing, they would land at Edwards on the lake bed, on the dry lake bed, because it's about, as I recall, it's about 10 miles long out there on the dry lake bed. So, the crew would have plenty of room to be able to bring it back safely, and not have to worry about running out of runway.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the way it was destined for the first six missions. They would all go to Edwards, and it was a progression. You'd land on the lake bed for, I think we landed on the lake. We were supposed to land for the first three, and then on number four, I believe, I may be wrong on this, they'd start landing on a hard runway.
Mm-hmm.
So,
as I consult my shuttle scroll here that people are familiar with that I use here, the actually first KSC landing was 41B Challenger in '84. So they did launch up till 9. They landed through Shuttle 9 out there. And then when they went to that wacky fiscal year numbering system, that's what 41B, 4 stands for fiscal year 84.
yeah.
1 stands for Kennedy, and B is sort of A, B, C, D. No, there was no A launched that time. So, but yeah, to be cautious, you got a tremendous national resource here in the space shuttle costing $2 billion, all right? So they want to make sure it had plenty of room to land, no problems
That's
there,
right.
until they got it down.
Excuse me. The only problem with landing on the lake bed that we found out quite quite early after STS-1 landed is it did do quite some damage to the tile. because of the, you know,
Debris being kicked
debris
up.
being kicked up from the tires. Wasn't anything major, but we did get quite a bit of tile damage.
Well, we're gonna as we look here at a couple things. Here's the launch control, 41 years ago. There, you see Rockwell guys got their jackets on there. We've heard a story several times about how the Rockwell got the teams were split up in colors so people could know who was who.
Well, yeah, you had Rockwell for the orbiter, and you had other companies, you know, that were various parts of it. So it was split up all over the place until we went into the where we had a new idea to combine into one contractor.
Mm-hmm. Which was become United Space Alliance.
Yeah, right.
In there.
USA.
Yeah, USA. There's another view that we show here. That's our green screen. The launch was at 7 a.m. precisely on April 12th, 1981. John Young is no longer with us. He's born in San Francisco, but grew up in Orlando. And of course, Bob Crippen is still with us. Why don't you speak about the bravery of those guys launching this? Here's your firing room, not yours, but permanent firing room badges like you would be wearing, or you weren't be wearing because you were out there in the Edwards. But these are memorabilia here. All those four together, if you've got them, they're worth $25, $30 a piece there to bundle them up there. So, and of course, this all came about because in June, 50 years ago, in April, in 1972, Congress approved $5.5 billion at the request of President Nixon and his administration. And this is the Houston Chronicle coverage in January's when Nixon actually took it to Congress. And that's Fletcher, the director there, James Fletcher. This was a big deal. $5 billion 50 years ago, Mr. Harrington.
That's big money.
Is about 50 billion. You can
Right.
almost put a zero behind these things then. Yeah, that's not $5 billion in 2020 money. This is $5 billion in 1970s money. So
Yep.
this was a big chunk of America's trust in that. What do you remember about that? And what can you speak about these Crippen and Young doing this?
Well, it was, it was, I guess you could say it was a bold move uh, for them as pilots, because now it's not like it hadn't been flown; it just had never been flown to space, because the Endeavor, which was a
Enterprise.
Enterprise. Yeah. It was a vehicle that was designed to fly, but not fly in outer space. And we did what we call the approach and landing test out at Edwards a few years before STS-1, where they would take the 747, put the orbiter on top of the 747, take it up and release it, and it would glide back in, and that's how that's how the crew learned how to land, along with the simulators that they had at JSC.
And so these approach and landing tests were at Edwards Air Force Base. 4 astronauts: Fred Hayes, Gordon Fullerton, Young. It was Hayes and Mattingly, and Fullerton and Truly.
Yeah,
I think were the 4 astronauts that did the tests out there, and those were so important to getting the confidence of a reusable space plane. When it landed, it was a glider and had no engines on it. Though 52 years ago, they were thinking about 2 separate space planes.
Right.
One would be both things being reused on there. Yeah, to look back 41 years, the legacy of the space shuttle today that hasn't flown in 12 years, coming up in July, is the International Space Station orbiting overhead.
That's right.
And so we're going to talk about some of Mr. Harrington's space launches in just a minute. But one of the missions that fascinates me was STS-3. 40 years ago this month, we had Jack Lousma and Gordon Fullerton flew the third test mission of the shuttle Columbia. And due to weather out at Edwards Air Force Base, they had to land at White Sands. And talk about a story. You happen to be the lead for bringing. Tell us how many boxcars and how this contraption all got together out there.
It was something that we at Kennedy had not I shouldn't say practiced, but we had planned on what if, Edwards, because it's known that Edwards does get rain in the wintertime, and the lake bed floods,
Mm-hmm.
and so we set about planning for a what if.
And this is mating and demating the shuttle on top of its carrier, an adapted 747. This is what it normally looked like out at Edwards with a mate demate structure.
That's called it's a fixed structure, in other
Mm-hmm.
words. But then what we had to come up with is, what if it's out there at some other place, either here in the United States or overseas.
Mm-hmm.
So this is what we came up with. It's called we used the mobile crane and what we call a stiff leg derrick,
Mm-hmm.
and it's assembled in place. We tried this up in Huntsville, Alabama, about I'm going to say maybe a year and a half prior to this, having to use it, and I distinctly remember that because it was in February, and I had never been so cold in all my life as we were out there on that runway doing that because it's wide open,
Uh-huh.
and in fact it was so cold that Rockwell went out to I think it was Penny's. I may be wrong on that, but I believe it was J.C. Penney's, and bought all the technicians some jackets,
Oh man.
fleece lined jackets,
Yeah.
keep everybody.
This was in Huntsville practicing for this inevitable
Yeah.
that happened out in 40 years ago out at New Mexico. That's interesting. Why there's what the mate demate looks like, and this is an important part of the shuttle because when it landed in California, they had to get it across country over here back to the launch site. So that was a tremendous procedure. And many of you have seen it flying over the coast and other places of America on top of there. But why would I want to throw the Santa Fe Railroad in there, Mr. Harrington?
Well, we had to get the equipment for turning the vehicle around, for not only for landing, but for also getting it turned around and get back to Kennedy. We had to get that from Edwards to White Sands,
Mm-hmm.
and so part of the plan was to contract with the Santa Fe Railroad to do all this, and so that was set up ahead of time, obviously. And the Santa Fe Railroad, in preparation for this to happen, as I was told, they went out and bought some new engines
Wow.
and set it up. And when the train left Los Angeles to go to White Sands, they put it on what they call an express. I believe their trade name was a Red Ball Express,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
which meant that it had priority over everybody.
Hmm.
and it just went nonstop from L.A. to Las Cruces.
How many train cars?
I, to be honest with you, I do not remember how. A lot of the
I
train
heard there
cars.
was about 40. I mean, a lot, not 10 or 12.
No, that was a lot of cars, and most of them were special cars. They had like flatbeds that had to handle the purge and cooling trucks, which, as you, I'm sure, have seen on whenever the shuttle landed. These were the two trucks that were behind the vehicle, and they had these long booms
Mm-hmm.
that attach cooling or purge air
Mm-hmm.
to the shuttle,
Hmm.
and they took up special cars.
Hmm. Such pride everyone in our country had participating in the shuttle program. Here's Santa Fe got to have a shining moment, and they bought new locomotives to
Yeah,
show the world. And
yeah.
was that typical that you would see when people got involved from regular business with the shuttle?
Yeah, it was. Everybody took pride in the shuttle program because it was unique to the country and something that never been done before.
Yeah. Well, that's what we love celebrating at the American Space Museum, and glad that you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook, Spotify, and Twitch. We've got Mr. James Harrington here with us and talking about some of his important moments of his career. Then he gets into becoming a launch director. And as I consult my shuttle scroll here, let's put a button on the STS-3 though out there before I do that. We've got the another kind of hard to find picture of all this amazing equipment that was taken out there by train, assembled out there. Look at this rare photograph of the whole assembly there. I mean, my gosh. Who's in charge here? Okay. Oh, he's over there by that sand dune. Okay.
Yeah, we
But
had
you
a
were in charge of this, weren't you,
yeah,
sir?
yeah.
What a responsibility and of a $2 billion asset of America's taxpayer.
That was a job that George Page assigned me for STS-1.
Mm-hmm.
He I had been in on the planning of what we were going to do as far as the convoy and all that stuff. And he called me up one day and he says, I want you to go out to Edwards and be the ground operations manager for STS-1. So, I said, okay. Yeah.
Probably not a guy you turned down when he asked you to do something.
No, no.
But what a privilege and what a
Yeah.
what a responsibility. Well, there it is, and there's the 747 taking off out of that white sands. And of course, Mr. Harrington, you know what everyone said until the demise of Columbia, that every time it went to orbit, some white sand came out of it somewhere.
That is a fact. That the first day for the attempted landing, I had or we all had an experience out there, white sands, that I'm sure none of us had ever experienced before. As I recall, about at a speed of about 27, 28 knots, that white sand is actually gypsum. It starts to get airborne.
Hmm.
And the day that we were supposed to
By natural winds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
the day we were supposed to come in by, for a landing, that happened. That the winds came up, and we were already out there at the site getting ready for the landing, and the winds came up, and you absolutely could not see 4 feet in front of you.
Hmm.
I mean, it was just a total whiteout.
Hmm.
And come time for the convoy to go out there on the runway, I sent them out there. Well, they got lost 3 times trying to get out to their spot on the
Oh
runway.
my gosh.
But, because of this whiteout. And I kept telling the guys at JSC that, hey, it's no go for landing because we can't see. Well, apparently, the STA, as far as they were concerned, when they would fly over, looking down, they had a clear sight.
Hmm.
So it was, it was a contest, really, verbal contest. I kept saying, "We're no go," and the guys at JSC taking the word, I guess, from the pilots and the STAs kept saying, "Well, we can see." So, fortunately, George was out there with us, and he got on the phone, and I assume he talked to the flight director, but he finally convinced them that we had to do another day.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
You were glad of that.
oh yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Couldn't even find where they were out there. There was no global positioning systems in
no,
in 1981. So you're kind of a desert area there. Boy, it would be kind of hard to figure
yeah.
with a whiteout going on. Yeah,
In
that's
fact, interestingly enough, after that day was over with, and I walked back to my car to go back to the motel. And the car was closed up, locked up tight. When I opened the door, there was 2 inches of that white sand inside the car.
wow, all over the seats and
All over,
everything.
yeah.
My gosh.
And even delaying it a day and landing the next day, which was okay. It was clear. It wasn't any wind. Like you said, for days, weeks, months, years thereafter, we'd find some of this white sand inside of Columbia.
That's amazing. That's amazing. We've got a photographer, Mark Usiak, who watches our show. Hi, Mark. He was out there as a young man photographing that. He remembers how cold it was,
Yeah,
too. It was very cold that morning.
yeah.
Consult my scroll here. When was STS-3 landed there? STS-3 landed, that's what I thought, March 30th. It was an 8-day flight there. Of course, Gordon Fullerton's passed away, but Jack Lausma, we talked to him at the Grumman reunion that they had a couple months ago, and he never forgets that landing either. But a little bit of a sigh of relief when the wheels lifted the air of that on that 47.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Heading back to Kennedy.
Yeah, because it was you were truly out there in the middle of nowhere.
So, well, thank you for reliving that little bit of a memory with us there. Let me go there, and we're looking at a launch room there. Uh, that 40 years ago that was going on, and what a lucid memory you have of all that, Mr. Harrington. We're enjoying a conversation here with Mr. James Harrington. Had a fabulous career as first a contractor in the early days at the Rocket Ranch, Cape Canaveral, and launching Atlas rockets. And then he got tapped by George Page of NASA to become more involved. And that eventually led to you being a launch director of 22 shuttle missions. And here is wanted to look at the control room there. That's a STS 130. That post dates you. I'm seeing which one I have on there now. Oh, I see. That's okay to show that. Yeah, we're showing that one, and then we're showing this is your office.
Yep.
For part of that time, and tell everybody what we're looking at there next to the vehicle assembly building.
We're looking at the launch control center that faces east, faces the pads, 39A and B, and the control rooms. Starting as you're looking at the picture from the left to the right, there's 4 of them up there. There's 2 on the left side and 2 on the right side.
And this is looking inside the control. I guess that's control one.
Probably
That'd be
so.
STS-30. All right. That's actually Mike Leinbach shaking Charlie Bolden's hand there, as Charlie was the NASA administrator, 4-time shuttle, twice a pilot, twice a commander there. But to give, we wanted to give you, stay curious listeners, watchers out there, an idea that the launch control are looking over the pool of uh, engineers and technicians and so forth manning a certain piece of that shuttle program. But you were involved with the MIR program. Uh, we do want to mention Marty, that we want to mention, let me take that away, and let's put our oral history such as this with Mr. Jim Harrington have been made possible by a grant from the Marie Louise G. West Endowment. They gave us a little chunk of money, Mr. Harrington, that we could buy the computer system and
All right.
monitors and so forth to take Marty and myself up to a new level. I don't think I mentioned Marty Winkle, our cameraman, and my co-producer working our Streamlabs engineering program there. Marty is in this picture back, way back there, Mr. Harrington. We think that's Marty right there, back in the cheap seats.
Wave, Marty.
But he's involved the launch process services there and the
Yeah.
motors. All right, that we're going to have Mr. Lee Solid talk about our event Saturday about those magnificent F1 engines that never let the shuttle down.
Right.
And if they did, they were aborted at the pad if they had a problem with it.
Right.
Were you part of any pad aborts? Do you
No.
remember?
No.
There were 6 or 7, and
No, I was.
there was like 3 or 4 in the beginning, and I'll bet you're glad of that.
Yeah. Came close one time on one of the launches. We got down late in the count, and the propulsion engineer called a hole and said that he had a problem with one of his final checkouts of the engine system. But as he explained it, he said that he felt like if he reran it, he said, we'll recycle, and he said if we come down to the problem again, he says he thought he had a fix.
Mm-hmm.
So we proceeded, and he went through and his systems test, and came up on the net again and said everything is good. I'm go. So at that time, I told the test director, I said, "You clear the launch," and we proceeded. So that's as close as I came to any one of the counts I had with the on the pad aboard.
Well, he had a fascinating launch career. When I look at my shuttle scroll here and eyeball the missions that you had, this was in the what I call the middle section of the shuttle, Mr. Harrington, when everything that we were doing was either involved with the space station, docking with the Mir space station, and learning the science in the payload bay that right now is happening on our International Space Station.
Right.
Before the space station was built, we had these space labs and space habs. Astro 2, Space Hab 3 was actually your first launch, STS-63 in February 95 with Weatherby was the commander. That was his third flight. Eileen Collins was actually the pilot of that. Consult my shuttle scroll here. But before we get involved in your launches there, I would like for you to share with everybody that you were involved with the Challenger accident, and you've told me you had a close relationship with Challenger pilot Michael Smith. But Johnson Space Center had a memorial service for the fallen heroes of our Challenger, and which President Reagan participated at. But KSC wanted to have their own service. And would you please tell us about your involvement with that?
Yeah, on excuse me, on the flight back from Houston, George English, who was the center director's uh, assistant, uh, came back to where I was sitting in the plane with my wife, and he said, "We want to talk to you. Can you come up?" You know, so I got up, went up there where they were sitting, and they said, "We're planning to have our own memorial service at Kennedy, and we'd like for you to do something on it." And I said, "Okay." Because I wasn't launch director at that time. I
Mm-hmm.
was what they call a flow director, and excuse me, that vehicle was I was flow director on Challenger at that time. And so they ran through what they had planned to do, and what they wanted me to do at the end of the ceremony is they wanted me to walk up on stage, pick up a big wreath, which was roughly about that wide,
Mm-hmm.
and get in the Astro van, ride out to the runway, and get on one of the NASA helicopters and take it out over the ocean. And there would be a countdown of which I could hear, a headset. And at 0, I was to sling the reef out into the ocean. So that's exactly what happened. You know, at the end of the ceremony, I did all of this. We got out there over the ocean, and I was listening to the countdown, and the pilot of the chopper, he banked the helicopter like this so that I would be throwing it up, instead of just straight out. I'd be throwing the reef up. And they had the big door open on the side of the ship, and I was strapped in so I couldn't fall out.
Right, windy. Is it
Yeah.
all that wind going on?
So 0, I slung it out, and then we, just banked away and flew on away. And when I got back, we landed. I picked up my wife, and we went home. And we had taped all this on, because it was live TV showing all this.
Mm-hmm.
So when we get home, we said, well, let's just see what it looks like. So it showed the helicopter. It didn't show me personally, floating out. It just showed the reef flying out. And whoever was following that did a good job. They tracked the reef all the way down to the ocean. And when it landed, a whole bunch of dolphins came up and circled the reef.
Oh my!
And of course,
Beautiful.
and my wife asked me. She said, "Did you do that on purpose?" I said, "Heavens, no." I didn't even.
Goosebumps, boy. That's
Yeah.
some goosebumps there thinking about that moment. What a beautiful tribute to our fallen heroes. That
Yeah.
one in there. That was, and you were involved with that. That's something else there. Yep. That's and just speak a little bit about the tragedy and going forward.
Well, it obviously set the program back for a couple of years till we could get the problem resolved, which was the O-rings on the solid rocket boosters. There was a redesign of the joints. There's 5 segments that are put together to make one booster, and in between these segments were O-rings to keep the hot gas, which is inside the rocket, keep the hot gas contained. And what happened on Challenger, I'm sure most people have read all of this, is that because of the cold weather, the O-rings were stiff,
Mm-hmm.
and when the joint flexes at ignition, because of you go from atmospheric pressure inside the solid rocket booster of 14.7 pounds to roughly 2,000 pounds per square inch in just a matter of milliseconds. So the rockets are tied, the segments are tied together at the joints, but with that pressure, you get this bowing effect, and the O-rings have to follow that strain on the materials, and obviously one of the O-rings, there was only two of them. One of them failed, so hot gas was leaked out, and it burned a hole in that segment on the powered flight, and that's essentially what happened. The hot gas came out, severed the attach point, the aft attach point for the tank, and the booster basically did this. It instead of being tied to the tank down at the bottom, it let loose and came over and punctured a hole in the LOX tank, and that disrupted the flow, and that was it.
Yeah, such a great description of that problem, and such an anomaly that the flame coming out like a blowtorch severed. It didn't ignite the tank. It severed the part holding the tank to the shuttle, and the SRB actually crashed into the tank. And
Right.
Boy, if that flame had been spurting just 180 degrees out the other direction, that probably would have been a return to launch orbit abort, wouldn't it?
Probably so.
Yeah. That'd have been a whole other but thank you for sharing that unpleasant part of our shuttle history there. But what a glorious image of you throwing that wreath out, and then dolphins surfacing there around the wreath where right where the cabin came down, as a tribute to that. That's a lasting memory there, Mr. Jim Harrington. Thank you for sharing that. Tell us a little bit about what a flow director does and how important that is as you got multiple shuttles being processed in our era, 3 at a time.
Well, that was another idea that came from George Page.
Mm-hmm.
One of the flights we had out there at Edwards, and we were, for the vehicle had already landed. I think it was the time frame. The vehicle had already landed, and we were turning it around, and George called me down to his motel room one afternoon and he said, I want to run something past you. And I said, okay. And he said, I'm creating a new job called the flow director, and there will be one per orbiter, and they will be responsible for, all the scheduling and following all the checkout, doing all the scheduling meetings, and reporting to the program director daily on what's transpired, what's going on, so forth. Excuse me. And so he said, I want you and Bob Seek to be the first two. So that's how the job started, and that's it kind of evolved between the two of us. He took I took Columbia, and he took Challenger, I believe, is the way it worked. And then I got sidelined shortly thereafter to sit on the source board for picking who was going to be the contractor. This was when USA was formed.
Mm-hmm.
So that I was tied up with source board for.
We talked to Mr. Jim Adamson not too long ago, and I love talking to Mr. Adamson. Twice an astronaut. He's got a fascinating career without being an astronaut.
Yeah.
Mr. Adamson does.
Yeah.
But he was very involved with that.
Yeah.
Wasn't he?
Yeah, he was.
And I know you know him and work with him. And of course, Bob Seek is our good friend here at the museum, been a treasurer and on our board for many years. and Bob will be at the our celebration of the shuttle here this Saturday with you. Looking forward to both you gentlemen
Yeah.
sharing some stories there with us. But yeah, what strikes me, folks out there, is Mr. Harrington's called up by his boss and said, I'm going to create a new position called flow director. Nobody knows what to do. You're going to figure it out. Okay.
Yeah.
Basically, right?
Right. That's what.
That nobody's ever done this before with a reusable spacecraft that we want to use 100 times was the idea back in the day. And of course, 33 or 34 was the most any of them did orbit. But your groundbreaking new jobs, new careers that didn't exist, and folks, this is the 1980s, late 70s. There's no internet, no mass communication, no email. You guys had things called avoid verbal order sheets where you'd
Yeah.
write out things to each other, phone calls, living on a phone, probably a roll of quarters in your car for pay phones. Speak about how maybe easy we have it today. You're launching things instead of the old days.
Well, going all the way back to the Atlas, that system was based on um, 28-volt relays, and there was virtually no solid state.
Right. Step motors and
Yeah.
electronic connections. And
Yeah,
I
and
always like to say, Jim, that if you could fix a jukebox, a pinball machine, a radio, or a TV, you had a job like that at NASA. That was the technology
Yeah.
that was the cutting edge. Jukeboxes and pinball machines were very complicated for their times.
Yeah.
Without circuitry.
yeah, we had. If I might digress, we had. I remember one time on one of the Atlas earlier Mercury launches. We had a vehicle getting ready to launch, and for the life of me, I cannot remember who was the astronaut on this particular one. But in any event, an engineering order, an EO we call them, had come down from San Diego to do a modification to the ground pneumatic system. This is a system that controls pressure in the tanks,
Mm-hmm.
and so it fell on me, the engineer in charge of all the electrical system there on the pad, to get this job done. So, we did it. We made the mods down in one of the panels, and come day of launch, we counted down. Test conductor hit the start button, and we just had virtually a 10-second static firing. Vehicle never went anywhere.
Hmm.
And the launch control system was part of my responsibility, so I went over and looked at the data, and I saw right away what the problem was. Ran out of the blockhouse over to my desk and pulled out a blueprint and started looking at a schematic. And as soon as I looked at it, because I had drawn in what this modification had done, I saw what the problem was. It had that particular design that San Diego had given to us had created a relay race.
Hmm.
And what had happened basically was the way it was wired up is when the pneumatics engineer threw his ready light on, it energized some relays, and the way it was wired up incorrectly is it disabled the ladder circuit in the test conductors panel.
Ooh.
And if you disable that, once you've hit the start button, another system comes in and it says, "Hey, we got a problem. We're not going to launch today. We'll power up the engines, but we're not going to launch."
Oh man.
And so that's what happened.
Huh.
And it was because the design engineer out in San Diego that created this fix or this change rather didn't see the whole picture
Uh-huh.
and didn't realize what he had done. He or she, I don't know who it was. And so that was that was just one of those weird things.
Mm-mm-mm. Well, that begs to ask you here before we get into a couple of your mirror launches here. What did keep you up at night, having all those responsibilities? What dominated mostly your thinking when you were launch director?
Uh, well, just that. I guess what you think about. I was never worried about the team. I mean, we I was. It was a privilege in my case to be associated with the launch team out there at Kennedy because they were that was some of the finest and smartest engineers I think this country has ever assembled. Uh,
Here's some of them behind us right here on our
yeah,
launching 41 years ago, STS-1.
and so I never really worried about the launch team because I knew that they had their job, and the only thing that ever sort of, if you want to call it, unsettled me was the weather because the weather you couldn't control. Uh, Case in point, uh, one of the launches that we had, uh, it was during the summertime, and there again, I don't remember which year it was. I think it was '96, but I may be wrong on that.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, it was, as I recall, it was a mirror launch. Uh,
Well, let's see here. Consulting the scroll, you had go ahead there. I got your mirror launches. Oh, 76 was in March, 96.
no, it was later than that. It was more towards. It may not have been '96. But in any event, we had a launch countdown. The countdown was going well. We had no problems during the count. We were just counting down to hit our window,
Mm-hmm.
and all of a sudden the weather guy over on the Cape calls up and he said, "Weather is no go." Now, mind you, I turn around and look out the window, and it's clear sky.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "Well, we got an indication from 3 field mills out around the pad, or not at the pad, but between 39A and Complex 41 over on the Cape side, that there's an indication of energy buildup that we would have a rocket triggered lightning."
Hmm.
So they had to call no go.
Wow.
And I'm looking out the window and I said, but,
But
yeah, it's clear sky.
yeah.
I don't see anything. I said, and since we only had a 10-minute window, there wasn't any way we could get anybody out there to those field mills to look at them. It was obviously a false reading,
Uh-huh.
and the weather people recognized it, and I did, but the rules are the rules. We couldn't go, so we had to scrub that day because we ran out. Ran.
Could have been 84 with Charlie Precourt, and that was a 6 shuttle docking that you did. May
Yeah,
of 97, Atlantis. And I know we're not pinning you down the exact thing there, but yeah, that the weather could also, I thought you were going to say that the transoceanic abort landing site had bad weather at Morocco or Banjul or somewhere like that, because that'd probably blow your mind too. It's nice here.
Well,
and
yeah.
we couldn't land at our abort sites across the Atlantic Ocean.
Any of those would, would ruin your day, so to speak. But that was a weird one. It was
Wow. Huh. May have to look that one up. I'll let you know what one that is when we go through our shuttles of the month and that comes up there, Mr. Harrington. You had 6 of the 9 shuttle dockings under your helm, which I think is very interesting. You also had the second Hubble service mission, 82, during your helm there with Bowersox as the commander. 22 missions, but you had 6 Mir missions. That's why we got the Mir NASA logo there. Let our viewers out there understand what a cooperation that was with the Russians, who were our adversaries during the space race to the moon. And here's a picture taken during STS 86 with Weatherby again as the commander. This is September 97, the 7th docking of Mir. Marty, the solar panels in the lower right, or the upper right-hand corner, and the ones on the bottom, those were actually hit by a cargo ship. And you see the damage to them.
Yeah.
That was a very tense moment on Mir when a cargo ship crashed into it. So, like I said, Mr. Harrington, speak about this cooperation with the Russians and how extraordinary that became.
Well, it was a big, obviously a big stepping stone for us for the shuttle and the space program to be able to dock and learn how to dock with a space station in preface for our, when we had our own space station, the ISS, which came about after this. And that was the first time that the shuttle program had to have a short window, launch window, because obviously we were chasing something.
Yeah,
in space.
right. Yeah, yeah. Also, I understand that everyone had to become acclimated to Moscow time.
Yes, because since the Mir was launched and had to fly over Russia for their control, we had to adapt and change our launch azimuth to a 57-degree inclination flight path in order to catch up with the space station when we lifted off, and we could have radio communications with Russia, as part of this whole process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Here's a cool picture. That is you on the right and Bob Seek on the left. Bob was the shuttle operations manager at the time, and you actually followed Bob as a launch director, and then. But that is a Jim Weatherby. Jim Weatherby, an amazing astronaut. He was a pilot once. He's our only 5-time commander of a space shuttle. And rather tall gentleman.
Yeah.
He's actually drummer in the rock and roll astronaut band called Maximum Q. Max Q. Yeah. Everybody's got smiles on their faces because it was a successful landing.
Yeah.
There. You said, tell me about Jim. He had a nickname there. You said.
Well, his nickname was Wexby, and it's weather is abbreviated WX, so that's how they came up with the name Wexby.
Old weatherman there, Seek.
Yeah.
He was a meteorologist.
Right.
In the early days of Gemini, I believe.
Yeah.
Mercury in there. So, you got a big smile on your face there. I mean, it's like tell us that happiness, those emotions there of.
Well, it's always, it's always a happy day when you have a successful mission and a successful landing, and that's like you said, that's after a landing there
Yeah,
at Kennedy.
that had been your next to the last flight there. Your final flight was 87 with Kriegel and was the commander. Lindsay was the pilot there. He went on to do good things there. That was Columbia. Columbia was your final launch, the 25th flight of Columbia
Yeah.
in November 97. And then, so why did you step down? What happened? What did you, how'd you transition from there?
Well,
I wanted to show you all the mirror.
yeah,
What an amazing, that gives you an idea how big the shuttle is or how small Mir actually was.
right. Yeah. What?
I was just saying after your final launch director was in 87,
Yeah.
1997, STS 87.
What drove me to retire was in '95. I had a physical exam, and a dermatologist found a melanoma on top of my head, right back about there. It was unusual in that he'd been in the business of dermatology as a dermatologist for quite a few years, and when he came in and looked at it, he said, "Oh, that's nothing. Don't worry about it." So, I was getting ready to leave the examination room, go home, and he stuck his head back in the door and he says, "Let me take one more look at that."
Hmm.
And he did. So he took a biopsy, called me up the couple of days later, and he said, "You need to come down here right away." And so I, went down to his office, and he said, "I'm gonna send you down to a doctor, a surgeon in Vero Beach. He was a plastic surgeon." And he said, "That's a melanoma." He said, "We need to get that out." So he did. My wife and I went down there, and the doctor down there took it out, and he left it open. He didn't put a skin patch on it. He just left it open, and every day at work, I'd go over to the dispensary, and they'd put some antibiotic ointment on there, and it finally healed up, and everything was fine. Except a year later, I went to a local dermatologist because I had a little bump on the back of my neck, and he found out that it was one of my lymph nodes where this melanoma had spread.
Oh my.
So they sent me over to Moffitt. They made a major operation where they took out from my neck all the way down across my shoulder. They took out 14 lymph nodes just to make sure.
Mm-hmm.
Fortunately, they were all clean. But then in that in itself made it go to the next step where I had to do chemo. So the chemo started in '97 and was going to go on for a year. And so by the time, by the time September or thereabouts had rolled around in '97, the chemo that you had to take it felt like it gave you the flu.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, 15 years ago, a lot rougher than what they do today.
And so it was just dragging me down, and I, not knowing what was going to transpire, after that, I just made the decision that I'm not doing the program any good because I didn't know what was going to happen, and I just made the decision to pull the plug and retire.
Well, you served our country great. David King launched 3 shuttles. Ralph Rowe launched another 4. Then David King came back. I think Mr. King become over Huntsville.
Yeah, he became center director
Okay.
for Huntsville.
And then Lineback took over
Yeah.
and finished the program out there. In Lineback's first flight was September 2000, and you'll see Mr. Mike Lineback and Bob Seek with Mr. James Harrington. We're going to have all 3 of them on the stage. 111 of the 135 launches between the 3 of you there. Over 80% of the launches there, and you know, like Mr. Seek says, all his came back and landed. All yours came back and landed too.
Yeah.
Of course, the Lineback had the S-107 tragedy in his term there. But we're ending our little conversation here with Mr. James Harrington. A fascinating career. You go back to 55 to when you retired in 95. So that's 40 years. 97 actually. So 42 years total career on there. To our country, working in our rocket industry here. And wanted to just show a picture of the launch control again, as it's configured much today. We have, of course, a big difference that you've seen in your career is all the women come on board.
Oh, yeah.
These are the women of launch control now, and not only women, but women of color. And how exciting is it that Charlie Blackwell Thompson is a launch director and going to launch our Artemis?
Yeah.
Do you know her personally? Is she?
No, I did
Okay.
not.
All right. I just wondered if you know, she may have wanted to talk to one of the old hands in there, but I'm sure everybody's got a good selection of Pepto-Bismol and Alka-Seltzer and whatever settles your stomach, because there's always you know, I've been a small manager of some businesses, and I characterize that, Jim, as when you're manager of something, all you do is just answer questions all day long. Okay. I can't imagine the questions you got and these people get, you know, launching today's rockets in there. But we want to thank Hyatt Place for sponsoring Stay Curious, and it's going to be the site of our wonderful event, the dawn of the Space Shuttle era, the golden anniversary this Saturday that Mr. Harrington's going to be a part of. Truly enjoy meeting you and getting to know you, sir. Is there something I didn't ask you that you'd like for our Stay Curious watchers to know about yourself or our wonderful shuttle era?
No, I just I'll just say that I was very fortunate to be a part of the space program from when I started, when I got out of school. And it was a privilege to work with all the many people that I had an opportunity to work with at that Kennedy Space Center. I used to still do call them the greatest launch team ever existed.
Well, good. And we're one of those. And I think we're fortunate to have a great mind like you, Mr. Harrington, be one of the very important behind the scenes leaders of our shuttle. And I guess we could owe a little of that to Mr. George Page for seeing that you could do these jobs. To me, they're just mind-boggling. And talking to people like you and Mr. Seek and Harrington, Leinbach, it's just the responsibility, and yet you knew how to compartmentalize things. You had a great team behind you that you had to have confidence in, correct?
Yeah, that's true. And I owe a lot. I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. I owe a lot to my wife. She put up with a lot of.
What's her name?
Jean.
How long you been married?
We've been married, let's see, 56 years.
Wow. Well, Gene, thank you for supporting this guy, okay, because we do know that behind a lot of great men or great leaders is a great spouse, that has to put up with some of the lot of times away from home and things like that in there. So how many children you have? And two kids and grandkids?
Two.
Two, okay. And you've got a Wamaranger.
Yeah.
Dog, yeah. Wamarang, what's that dog's name?
Bailey.
Bailey. Okay. Well, we know you're going to have we appreciate everything you've done today, taking time out of your day away from home to come down here to Titusville and share with us a little bit of your life. Been a true pleasure, Mr.
Likewise.
Harrington.
Appreciate it.
And we want to hear more of you. You'll hear more from me as I call you up occasionally to straighten me out about things that we're talking about on Stay Curious. So looking forward to seeing you Saturday. There will certainly be some of you visiting us Saturday to get an autograph from this guy and hear their stories that they're going to have to say. So thank you, Mr. Jim Harrington, for a wonderful conversation on Stay Curious. And I'm Mark Marquette, hosting our program. Marty Winkle, thank you for all that you do behind the scenes here. And we will see you again to bridge the space between us.